Hey now. How y'all doing? I'm so excited to be here because, this is, she started off being a subject of a story for me. And I call you friend now because, for so many reasons. But I also have to say that you are my savior. I just got back from Asia. I was in Singapore, but I'm going to get back to that in a minute. And I was very sick, like crawling, like fainting in the kitchen all by myself, and it was a hot mess. Anyway, I say all of that because sitting in the pantry, as I recall the days of my Nightline years, when Ted Koppel told me, as I was again sick in this time, you need to make a hot toddy. Yes. And I had tried everything else, and there was Uncle Nearest. Yes. A little lemon, a little cayenne, a little honey. I was set. Yes. So thank you. Yes. Because I am alive and well today. Yes. Thanks to several hot toddies.
When Dr. Fauci is here, tell him they got it all wrong. I didn't get COVID the whole time, and I was on planes every day, and people are like, how's that possible? I had Uncle Nearest every day, too.
So it's medicinal purposes, I can vouch for it. I met this lady, oh gosh, it's been now 8 years ago, and I was sent down to Tennessee. And her story, I think, I always love to say, I just first time set foot in Singapore, and the minute I was in Singapore, literally, I thought of you because that is where this story began. Mm-hmm. Love and Whiskey, how many of you have read it? Oh, not too many. How many of you will be reading it? Yeah. Everybody in this audience. This puppy is really a gift of life, longevity, and love. And it all began reading the International Times in Singapore. Take it away.
Take it away. So on the cover of the New York Times International edition was a photo of Jack Daniel. And I didn't drink Jack Daniel, but I think we all know what he looks like. His company's done a brilliant job making his face ubiquitous around the world. And so I noticed the photo immediately, not because it was Jack. I mean, we see his face everywhere, but because to his immediate right was an African-American man. And it was very easy to peg it as being either the 19th century or right at the top of the 20th century, when it would have been highly unlikely for that to have been the placement of an African American. And so that immediately caught my attention. And then the headline was, Jack Daniels embraces a hidden ingredient, help from a slave. And when I saw the two together, I was like, this is amazing, because they're bringing forth this story that obviously has been in their history for all this time. And I mean, I'm literally, when you're in another part of the world and you're looking at American news and that kind of story is headline, you just, I don't know, there's something about it. But by the time it got to us, it was a day or so after the story released here in the US. So then you go online to try to look up a little bit more, and my God, Black Twitter had very quickly decided from that photo and that headline, but from nothing in the actual article itself, that Jack Daniel stole the recipe, hid the slave. And so I'm reading this, and I mean, they are just ripping Jack to shreds all over the internet. And I'm looking at this photo and going, you do realize if you wanted to hide somebody in the 19th century, you just left him out of the photo. And so for me, I've always been a rebel, but always a rebel with a cause. I've always been a rebel, and I was drawn to the story, I think, in part because I felt like the internet got it wrong. And I thought that the reason why it got it wrong so quickly is because it was 2016. We were in the middle of a very, very, very heated election cycle in which race was being used on as a wedge on both sides. Both parties were using race as a wedge. And so this became a very easy pickup of saying, once again, black people have been stolen from. And what I loved about this story, if what I felt in my gut was true, then this could be one of the stories where we weren't stolen from. And that's the story that I was drawn to.
Yeah, your instincts couldn't have been more like dead on, because I still marvel at this woman who was on vacation with her husband, who's a big time, or at the time was big time Sony executive. And she could have very well, oh, that's a really nice story. Isn't that sweet? But no, she literally dropped her bags in LA, which is where she lived, told her husband, see ya, I gotta go check out what's going on in Lynchburg, Tennessee. Now, the name itself would have scared me some. But what was so interesting, again, that's not what the name means, but that's another story. But to meet Fawn, when I first met her, I was like, she is intensely curious. And by the time I crossed her paths, she had done this extensive research in a way that nobody else, one, could have accessed, and two, had the curiosity to lend themselves on the hunt. So, first of all, kudos to your curiosity, but how did you do it? And what did you discover?
Yeah, so one of the things is that I was a bourbon drinker at the time, and I'm still obviously a bourbon drinker. And if you look at any bottle of bourbon, up until that point, 2017, since Uncle Nearest has come out, we have some black-owned bourbons, a few of them. But up until that point, every single bottle of bourbon was made by a white man, was commemorating a white man. You're talking about a population of this country that's 30%, and it's not to diminish it, but every single bottle. And so for me, what was so amazing about this is let me give you, because many of you haven't read the book. So this is the truncated version of who Nearest Green was. Nearest Green is the first known African American master distiller. And the reason why I always say first known is I'm positive there were some in Kentucky. And my hope is the success of Uncle Nearest would cause them to be less afraid of admitting their past. Because there's a way that you can bring your past forward even if you were in the wrong. But for Nearest's family now, they can go to any restaurant, any bar, anywhere in this country, and they're treated as royalty. I want to see other families receive that same treatment. We have been in the bourbon business, in the whiskey business, for almost 400 years. And we can only name a single African American. So he was the teacher of Jack Daniel, the mentor of Jack Daniel. He is the only known master distiller for distillery number 7. So when we're enjoying, or people are enjoying Old Number 7, that is where that comes from. And so you have Nearest Green, this remarkable master distiller for Jack Daniel. So that's the background of it. When Jack and his family were alive and running the distillery, the story of Nearest Green was always a part of it. And the last of his descendants, Regger Motlow, died in 1978, and the story was removed by 79.
Okay, that's a really important point, because was the Tennessee, the quarterly.
Yeah, yep.
It was the Tennessee Quarterly that kept naming, am I correct about this, Nearest Green as the first master distiller of...
Well, it wasn't, so yes, but that was just one publication. It was that Jack's family made sure, whenever someone asked him, who was your first master distiller, they made sure They were not shy about saying it was nearest green. That's number one. Number two, that the process that made Tennessee whiskey so famous came in with the West Africans. The enslaved people that were in the hills were the ones who taught everybody how to do it. They were the ones who went on record in the press in saying that. And the strategic positioning, when the front of the book has the photo of Jack and Nearest's son, George Green, is who that is. But I open up the book with the full photo because I think it's important for people to see the full photo, not just the crop photo. And the reason why this is important is if you've turned the page, I'll let y'all get to it. This is really cool that y'all all have the book so that you can see this. Because usually I'm describing it and people have to remember what I described. But y'all have it in front of you, which is very cool. Okay, you all have it? All right. Two things to notice about that photo. The very first one is that the photo is the only known photograph that Jack Daniel ever took with anybody else. This is with his leadership team. And as you will notice, Jack is not the center. He ceded the center of the photograph to the African-American man. That was a statement. And the question for me became, what was the statement he was trying to make? Now, the book shares that, and we'll talk about that tonight, but that is a statement. The other thing that you will notice, if you look very closely, is everyone in the photo is seated, except Jack Daniel. He never grew to be more than 5'2". And at that time, his right leg is amputated. He's leaning on a cane. So George Green and his nephew Lem Motlow are the two people who he trusted to cover that infirmity. People did not know that he had no leg.
So I think we need to kind of fill out the blank of who Jack Daniel was to understand. And I love the idea of like how you talk about the biographer and the fact that Nearest is mentioned more than anybody else in the biography. But who was Jack Daniel, and how did he come to meet Nearest Green?
Yeah, I think that what's so interesting about the story is when you look at the story of Jack and Nearest, and by all accounts, Jack may be the first ally of what we refer to now as an ally. But I don't think he really saw himself different from Nearest because he was the 10th child born, and his mother died when he was 4 months old. And she died of typhus fever. So she contracted it 7 days later, she was dead. Now, in those days, men didn't know how to raise children. So the way they dealt with a situation like that is they married another woman. So Jack is being wet nursed, breastfed by the next door neighbor. And then his father finds another woman to marry. Well, as Jack gets older, at that time, and even still, but really at that time, as soon as you were big enough to go out into the fields and to work, I don't care if you're white or black, as soon as you're old enough to go into the fields, you're out there and you're working. There's a whole lot of land in Tennessee. And so, but Jack was like a runt. He was tiny, so he wasn't that helpful. And his father's wife wasn't a fan. So at 7 years old, he leaves. 7. Y'all, we coddle our kids. Kids were driving at 8 years old we coddle our kids. When you go back and you look at the history of you can just pick anyone. Andrew Carnegie, he was a bobbin boy at 13 years old. He was working in factories. You can just kind of pick any of our American titans, and they were all working by about 11 years old. None of them were going to school, by the way. And so he was 7 years old. He goes to a neighbor's farm by the name of Dan Call to be hired on as a chore boy. So this is not a glamorous position. This property is it was at that time it was 338 acres, and we own it. So I know exactly how long it takes to go from the house to the well for where he had to go to get the water, to go to all of the different things to bring it to the family. He's feeding slop to the pigs. He's milking the cows. And I know when we talk about American history, we don't really look at it this way. We don't think about it this way. But just consider that even though Nearest was an enslaved man, he was actually in a more elevated position because Jack was a chore boy and Nearest Green had the most prestigious position for an African American. There are only two positions that you will see in newspapers where some of our most powerful white men are literally paying for ads across the country trying to track down their enslaved people. Two positions: distiller, blacksmith. And so those were two highly, highly skilled positions. And so the one thing that you will see as you're reading through history is the distilling work was a lot of work. But what you will find is when there was any level of respect toward an enslaved person, they were usually either a distiller or a blacksmith. Jack would have gotten no such respect. And so I don't believe that he grew up really seeing Nearest as anything other than a mentor, other than a teacher. I don't think he saw him as a black teacher or a black mentor. He was the mentor and the teacher. And then Jack was orphaned during the Civil War when his father passed away.
There's so much. I don't want to give away. I'm not going to give. We're not going to give. We're not going to. There's so much of that history from the 19th century that's in this book. The details, the who, what, why, when, where, how. You get it all. So we're going to save that. And I want to hopscotch to you discovering this story and seeing one value in the story, and then this notion, oh, I'm going to create a whiskey from nothing.
I hope I didn't sound like that when I had the idea.
She did not. No, but I mean, seriously, because you literally started this company up 8 years ago. Under the nose of Brown-Forman and Jack Daniel. You understand
Brown-Forman owns Jack Daniels.
I'm sorry. Brown-Forman owns Jack Daniel. Do you understand what she did? Do you understand what this woman did? It is $1 billion and counting dollar. I'm probably off by some figure in the millions. How did you do that?
Listen, it is, I would love to take credit. I just can't. And it's funny because I have received, I probably get, every couple weeks, I will get some kind of big organization wanting to honor me and wanting to give me some kind of award. And everybody from my press people to my assistants to my leaders, everybody has the same template. Fawn doesn't accept awards. And there is only Michelle, for the NAACP for their 80th anniversary. It was important to a good friend of ours who was at that time the president of ABC News. And she asked me to accept the award. I said, girl, I do not accept awards. And so she gave me a whole long dissertation about how it would help the NAACP. So I took the stage and said, I don't accept awards, so this is going to my husband. And then there was one other one that I accepted for Ebony, and it really was just so I could tell the world how amazing my husband was. That's literally the only reason that
Keith Weaver,
my
give him a
husband.
big hand.
Yes,
big
he's
supporter,
yes.
#1 fan.
Yes, my husband of 21 years. He'll be 22 this year. But I don't accept awards, and the reason that I don't accept awards, I don't enjoy them. And the reason I don't enjoy them is because I know they're giving me credit for something God did. Only thing that I have done in this process is keep the faith and not give up. Under every circumstance, under every challenge, that's the only thing that I can actively say that I do. Now, don't get me wrong. The Lord has given me an enormous amount of gifts that I apply toward this, but you got that I said they were a gift. I didn't earn them. So it doesn't make sense to me to receive awards for something I didn't earn. And so for me, when I look at this story, when I look at how did this happen, it was already set in motion before I was in my mother's womb. I truly believe it. And so when I look at the things that happen, I'll just give you a few examples. When she talked about me going down to Lynchburg, Tennessee, and I just kind of referenced the fact that I now own the property where Jack grew up. Right. Okay. So that now 313-acre property, where, by the way, the original Jack Daniel Distillery #7, it's there. Right.
But you had the forethought or hindsight, whatever it is. You had the vision to say, I need to own that property.
Sort of. Kind of.
Because you owned it by the time I went down.
Oh, I owned it day 3. So in the library, as I was doing research, which I love that we're in a library, because the story came to life. I'm in the library in Lynchburg, Tennessee. My husband and I are there. And it goes around the community very quickly what we were there for. And that there's this New York Times bestselling author and her husband who's an executive vice president at Sony Pictures. The reason everybody knew is it had already been a conversation before we got there, because if you've ever rented a home on VRBO, you have to tell the host who you are. So we told the host who we were, and the host told everybody in town that there was a movie producer and his best-selling book writer wife were coming to town. And so everybody in town was already expecting us. I mean, this is a town with like a single straight light, right? So everybody in town was already expecting us. So it once we were in the library, it moved very quickly that what we were there for. And Jack Daniel's eldest living descendant walks through the door. Now, at the time, her mother was still alive. Her mother at the time was 103. But she was still alive, but now it's the eldest descendant, and she comes in because, again, we're African American from Los Angeles, and Black Twitter was lighting her family up. So there would be no reason for her to think that I was there to find any positivity in this story. And she came over to where we were, and I'll skip past some of it, but the bottom line is I said to her, listen, I'm not here to harm your family's legacy. I actually think that social media has this story wrong. I believe that the press has it wrong, because the press, for whatever reason, followed social media in telling this story.
Not me.
Not Michelle. Michelle actually did the story. Thank you, Michelle, for journalism.
We're going to get to a little bit more of that in just a second.
But most of the press that was writing on this story simply picked up the story from social media. So I told her family, I believe that they have it wrong. I believe that this is a story of love, honor, and respect. And I laid out for her why I believe that to be the case. Michelle mentioned earlier that Jack Daniel's biography, that it mentioned Nearest and his family more times than Jack's own family. But let me set that up a little bit. You have a book written in 1967, the height of the civil rights era. You're in Lynchburg, Tennessee. Just the next year, Martin Luther King would be assassinated in Memphis. The KKK, that was rising up around that time in Pulaski, Tennessee. The original sit-ins, Nashville. So this is a hotbed civil rights era. That's the same year that Detroit went up in fire with the riots. And you have a white reporter from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that goes to Lynchburg, Tennessee to write the authoritative biography of the most famous American whiskey maker of all time, then and now. And he includes Nearest and his boys more times than Jack's family. That was intentional. The question became, whose intention? Well, then once you start reading that book and you realize who was being interviewed, it was all of Jack's descendants. He didn't have any children, but it was his nephew who took over the distillery 4 years before he passed away. He passed it on to his nephew, Lim. The person who came into the library was Lim's granddaughter. Then you have Lim's 4 sons who then took over and ran the distillery. Then you have everybody who knew Jack, touched Jack, had anything to do. Jack died very young, so most people were one generation removed. So they knew, their parents knew him very well. Everybody just knew Jack in Lynchburg, and that's who was being interviewed. Do you realize how many times people would have had to have mentioned Nearest and his boys to be talked about from the very early portion of that book. So you take that coupled with the photo, and now you're looking at something that is intentional. And what it said to me was, it is not that Jack was trying to erase who Nearest Green was and Nearest's boys, George and Eli, and their legacy. He was trying to make sure America wouldn't. The positioning in the photo, if he had put George Green in the back, nobody would know who he was. He intentionally put him as the center of the photograph, so no matter how many times America tried to erase him from the story, you wouldn't be able to. It's the only photo with Jack. And so when you're looking at that in totality, this granddaughter comes in, or great-granddaughter comes in, and after I say that to her, she said, then you know what? I want to help you. And she pulls out her cell phone, and she gives me the number of her childhood friend, who she's still very much so friends with, one of Nearest's descendants who had been doing genealogy for 30 years, not just on her own family, but on every African-American family in that community and how they connected. So she became the connector for every interview that I needed to have. But the last thing her name is Judy, the last thing she said before she left, she said, you know that book that you read? You realize the property where Jack grew up, where Nearest was a distiller, yada, 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 yada. She's like, it's for sale. You should buy it. Now,
You can't make this stuff up.
you can't make it up. And so the next day, I thought it was the same day, but then when I was going through my records, I realized it was the next day. So the next day, I get a phone call on my cell phone from this woman with just the deepest Southern drawl I had ever heard in my life, and it's Judy's cousin. Now, mind you, we're still on Jack's side of the family. And she said, you met my cousin at the library. She said, you want to go see the Dan Call farm? I'm a realtor. I'll take you. So the next day, we go to see the Dan Call farm, and we're walking around and looking at this property. It had been on the market for 15 months. And every time someone would make an offer, the owners would raise the price because they believed that they would know who the next steward of that property was. The house was on the market for $1.4 million. And we went to a barbecue place that was expecting us. Not kidding. They knew my name. They knew what I like. Not kidding. And the owner comes and grabs a chair, and he said, so I hear you're interested in the Dan Call farm. That was my first job. I know Ed McGee, who was the owner. I know Ed McGee really well. Let me tell you a secret. There are no secrets in the South, by the way. He said, let me tell you a secret. If he likes you, he'll take less. He's only raising the price because he doesn't like the people who keep offering. And so he tells us he will take a lot less if you offer cash. So in the South, for some reason, cash is different from a mortgage. I still haven't figured that out. It still closes an escrow as cash, but for whatever reason, it's different. And so we offered, now mind you, Keith and I had been there, I think this was day 3. We offered $900,000 cash. And he took it. But here's the key, though. Keith and I had just been in the middle of an investment where we had invested a lot into 2 founders, well, really a founder and her partner, and the deal was going really, really bad. And we knew that we were about to lose everything that we put into it, which was about $2 million. And when at the time I was 39, and he was 44, and that was a lot of money for us. And so we really did not have a lot in our bank account. And by we didn't have a lot, I mean we had very little. And so we offered $900,000 cash. And we left and we were like, how in the world is that going to work out? But there was just something in us that felt like, here's the deal, go for it, and if it don't work, it won't work. But there's no reason for us to shut down the idea before it happens, because if we could acquire it you're not going to get another American historic property like that. I mean, this is a property where Jack Daniel number 7. But so
Hal Brown Foreman didn't own that property. I do not know.
there's different versions of that story in terms of what happened there, and I don't know whose version is right. What I know for sure, and this is going back to when I say that there were all these different things that just it came to us. We did not go to it. Is the owners, because they weren't expecting to sell it, I mean, it had been on the market for 15 months. They weren't prepared. So their realtor calls us and says, we know this will be a really great inconvenience, but if you could give them a 4-month escrow, and and what they need as the deposit, as the earnest money, is $9,000.
Hello.
This is why I don't accept awards. Okay? So that's the first thing that happens. Then, as I'm continuing to do the research, we're still in escrow. And the realtor, our realtor, Jack's descendant, says, if you ever decide to put his name on a bottle, I'll come out of retirement to make sure you get it right. She'd worked in the family business her whole life. Her real estate was her new retired job. She had worked for Jack Daniel Distillery for 31 years and was the head of whiskey operations when she retired. Okay, wait, but that's not all. Okay, so that's just 2 things. But I would say the thing that makes it so clear to me that this was chosen for me before I was in my mother's womb is, as I was continuing to do research, I discovered that there essentially were 5 keepers of the legacy of Nearest Green that made sure that this story didn't die. The first person in that is Nearest Green's granddaughter, Mammy Green. Mammy Green owned a home that was a stone's throw from Jack Daniel. So when they stopped telling the story in 78, anytime people would come to her house and they'd sit on the patch, and she made supper, which is at noon. She made supper for people at Jack Daniel every single day. Her brothers and cousins worked there. They all came over. And she made sure that everybody knew my granddaddy made the whiskey for that man. She never let the story die, even when they stopped telling the story. The second person is Ben Green. Ben Green is the biographer of no relation. He's the white reporter from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The third person is Clay Risen. He's the New York Times reporter who picked up the story that I read. So then that makes me number 4, right? So as I'm going through and doing my research, I come across a newspaper clipping that has Mammy Green. And it's a photo of her, and it says, Mammy is turning 99 years old. Send her a birthday card. I mean, they've got one stoplight, y'all. So this is, and so this is the newspaper clipping. But then I realized that she turned 99 years old. She was born on September 5th, 1901.
Wait for it.
And I said, that's interesting. We're born on the same day. That's really, really cool. So then I'm interviewing Ben Green's son and learn that Ben Green, the biographer, was born on September 5th, 1902. And I was like, now that is really weird.
That's 3.
But I love it. Then my husband texted me one day, and he said, hey, babe, you probably already know this, but did you realize you and Clay Risen were born on the exact same day, same year, September 5th, 1976? And we were all born on the day, historically celebrated until recently when they began celebrating the entire month of September. We were all born on the day historically celebrated as the birth date of Jack Daniel. Again, why I don't accept awards. If there is ever something where a person was chosen to do it, you're looking at that.
You always do this. There is so much more out there. So much that you talked about is not in the book. But there's your story, okay, which I did not know, and which is thoroughly engaging. and I don't even know where to start with 2 minutes left to talk because I'm told we have to go to questions in 2 minutes. But I want people to know who you are and what you have overcome in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's all I got.
Well, what you'll find out in the book is my pathway to where I am today is a little different than most. So usually when people do the bio and they do the introduction and it's University of Alabama, summa cum laude, and it's the successful entrepreneur for 30 years, and it's all these different Harvard. It's like all these different accolades, right? But the piece that they never say is that I left home when I was 15. I dropped out of high school when I was 16. I lived in 3 homeless shelters by the time I was 18, and I tried to commit suicide twice when I was 21. That's the part of the story I prefer to tell. And so that is in the book because I think it's really important for people to understand. It's one of the reasons, even in our current division of America, I travel all over the world. You couldn't pay me to live anywhere else. Could not pay me. Because my story is only possible here. When Barack said that, it is true. My father was a cotton picker in Houston, Texas, who went to Southern University, who was kicked out for participating in a civil rights demonstration, a sit-in, and the civil rights organization said, if you get kicked out of college for participating in a civil rights demonstration, we will pay for a one-way ticket anywhere in the United States. My father said, I want to be a writer and producer, and he chose Los Angeles. He's in Los Angeles, and he is making music, and some of this music gets to Detroit, and he gets a call from Berry Gordy, and Berry Gordy says, I have this startup in Detroit, and would you be interested in coming and writing and producing for me? So my father became one of the original hit makers. Tell me what other country that's possible. Name any other country. And so with all of our challenges, with all of the frustrations, every 8 years, somebody is going to be in the office that you either like or don't like. You can guarantee it. Because 50% of the country is going to vote one way, 50% of the country is going to vote another way. You know what that's called? That's called democracy. And I do my best to respect whoever is in the office because I recognize that 50% of the country didn't agree with me, and that's because their worldview is different. And I want them to respect who is in the office when I have the person I want in the office. And so our country, we have decided for whatever reason that we are going to tear each other down, that we're going to be divided. And what I love so much about Love and Whiskey is it reminds us of the best of America, because even when you're talking about a story that began with enslavement, the worst part of our American history, it's still a hopeful story. And every area of this country, in every generation, no matter what we were going through, there were always good guys. There were always people who did what's right. And I choose to believe that those people carry the actual spirit of America.
And I just want to, because we didn't go into great detail, thank you so much. Uncle Nearest is a company that one is seated in the family of Nearest Green. Your master distiller is a descendant. There's an interesting story in the book about all of the descendants and their choices, because I'm sure you could read about some of the choices they've made. But there's also the growth of this business and the vision beyond. And I would love to dig into more of that. We have no time because we want to ask the questions of the audience. But I want you to know that this sister here has other things that she's done by promoting other businesses in the BIPOC community, by promoting other ideas she has in her mind. I'm going to let her talk to those. But I want to go to the questions in the audience. Do we have questions in the audience? Right here. But I'm just leaving that open so you know maybe that's the question you ask.
Y'all, she's trying
What's
to
next?
give you the questions that she couldn't get to.
Yes. That's my question, Michelle. You asked my question for me. I want to know what the vision is. Like, what else do you want to do with this company? Like, what vehicle is this
This
company?
right here.
Yeah.
When I talk about projection, that right there was a mind meld.
The Free Library of Philadelphia.
Oh,
it means
it's
so
my
much.
honor. It's my honor. Books have always been my teacher. When people, I was telling Michelle, I turned in the first 100 pages of my next book to my agent last night, and the entire book is a deep study of every one of our American Titans, how they built. They all used different blueprints, but they all left behind the blueprints. And then I tie them to the modern entrepreneurs who we know who are highly successful, but I show them that they still use the original blueprint. And the reason I do that is because I didn't have mentors. I dropped out of high school. I didn't have a teacher standing in front of me. I had books, and I would get the books from the library. And so that libraries hold a special place in my heart, because I'm not intelligent because I went to college. I went to college 30 years later. I'm intelligent because I kept reading and everything I needed to learn. So when people ask me, will I mentor them? And I get the question in my Instagram DMs probably 5-10 times a day. And my response to them is, nope, but here's your list of books. Every time. And so that entire book is about being the mentor. But for this company, for the overall vision, when I came into it, it was really, really simple. The only reason we're still talking about Jack Daniel, Johnny Walker, Jim Beam, the only reason we know these people is because we're still looking at their names on bottles every day. If this was just a book, Love and Whiskey, and then it was a film, the best way, and I put this in the book, think about, I would imagine almost every single person, if not every single, well, let me just ask the question. How many people in here saw Hidden Figures? Exactly. How many people in here can name the 3 women who were the hidden figures that were played by Octavia Spencer, Janelle Monáe, and Taraji P. Henson? You don't count, Judge. Anybody other than the judge? Do you see my point? We all went to a movie to learn about Hidden Figures, and we all left out of the film knowing about the 3 actresses we knew before we got there. And spoiler alert, Kevin Costner's role didn't actually exist in real life. He was made up. They said he was an amalgamation of a lot of people, and I was like, well, you want to name anybody in that amalgamation? But the entertainment, we have so much entertainment. We're on to the next thing so fast. And so the only reason that Nearest Green story was able to be erased to begin with is because it wasn't on a bottle. It was in a book. And so it became very clear that it needs to be on a bottle. Well, once the brand came out, and as Michelle alluded to earlier, at the time, that company was a $24 billion company. And many within the company not so excited about what I was doing. And so there was a little bit of a civil war going on. You had about half of the folks who were supportive and half the folks that were not supportive. But either way it goes, we had no way of knowing how they were going to respond, if they were going to focus all their efforts on killing it. And so I had to deploy what I call a Tasmanian devil strategy.
It's in the book, and she also mentions me because
I
asked
do.
a very interesting question.
You did. But that Tasmanian devil, what that really meant was, so most brands, an independent brand, you come out within 7 years, if you can get into a state that touches your state, your home state, you're doing really, really well. If within 10 years of having the company, you can be in 7 states that all kind of touch, you're doing amazing. Well, that would be too easy for them to kill. And so I decided within the first 2 years, I was going to be in all 50 states. And the reason why that was important is because when you're doing national press, like Michelle's show, most national press don't want to talk to regional brands. And if they do, like Michelle did, if they will talk to someone that is not in every state, you miss the opportunity of benefiting from that earned media in terms of selling your product.
But you weren't selling a product.
No.
It was the story that was so.
No.
But what I realize now is you had the product in mind already.
Well, you already had it in the book, remember?
right, I know,
Yeah.
but that
It was
took-
already in a...
But you had to.
Oh,
I'm just saying
absolutely.
You're forward thinking.
Oh,
That's
no,
my
no,
point.
absolutely.
That's my point.
Yes. So all of that to say, once it came out and we began to grow very quickly, faster than any other American whiskey in U.S. history, and I was in the press, still am, 2-3 times. Well,
Forbes magazine.
for everything. I generally do 2 to 3 interviews a day, even to this day. But what I discovered is that in doing all of this and building this brand, I began showing up at places and to talk about the brand, and there would be women and people of color who would literally come up to me and start crying. I was like, why are y'all crying? This is whiskey. But what I discovered very early on is that I was representing hope, because I had come into an industry that had never before been disrupted. And if I could disrupt an industry that has never had a woman or a person of color succeed, then whatever industry they're in, they could disrupt. And so it went from being about just having Uncle Nearest, the brand. What I realized very quickly is every single spirit company that exists that does very well, with the exception of Tito's, every single one is owned by a spirit conglomerate. The industry is set up that way. We have a second tier that I can't sell to anyone in this room unless you come to my distillery. I sell to a distributor. The distributor sells to the restaurants and the bars. Because of that, the big spirit conglomerate can make sure that no one gets any shelf space except for them. If I say, Bacardi, most people in this room are likely going to think of a rum, right? But if you're in our industry and you say Bacardi, you never think of rum, because rum isn't their big seller. You think of Patron Tequila, who they own. You think of Grey Goose Vodka, who they own. You think of Douce Cognac, who they own. I could go down a whole list of brands, Bombay Sapphire, that all belong to. And so what became very clear is that this could not stand alone and continue to grow without being bought. And I was adamant that this was not going to be bought by one of the spirit conglomerates. But the only way to not be bought by a spirit conglomerate is to become one. And so last year we bought the first organic vodka company in America. It turns 20 years old this year. We reformulated, rebranded, all the rest of that. That will launch this summer. And we became the largest Grand Champagne vineyard owner in the city of Cognac, France. And from what I know, I may be the first American they've ever sold vineyards to, because that goes through a government process. You can't just go in there and buy vineyards. It goes through many, many layers. They have to believe in you.
It's a good thing you did it a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Lord knows. Lord knows. But that is the vision. The vision is there are 6 spirit conglomerates that control more than 90% of the volume of liquor in this country. Every single one founded by, owned by, run by white men, even those that are publicly traded. That is who's the chairman of the board. And so I'm building the first one that is not built by, founded by, run by a white man.
We have time for just one more question.
This has gone so fast. Oh my goodness.
I know, hasn't it?
That's crazy.
Because you have the gift of gab.
I do. My husband says I could talk the hind legs off a donkey.
So, Fawn, what a fabulous, fabulous event. I've been following you. You are amazing. So thank you for being such an amazing role model for all of us women. I have a question about tariffs, though.
Ooh,
so
that's good.
I've been thinking about it because I follow her. And so when you think of the tariffs with Canada, right? You just mentioned champagne. That's coming back in from France. Tariffs there. How are you dealing with that and navigating that? And just share how that's impacting your company.
I'm surprised people are surprised by it. The man telegraphed this last year when he was running. So the 50% of America who voted for him voted for tariffs. And that's the part that I think so many of us miss. So once it became clear to me that he would be the next elected president, I told my chief business officer, pull out all foreign sales from our forecast. They won't be there next year. We began making cuts, significant cuts on the expense side, but not cutting people, but cutting every single bit of fat we could cut in August. So for me, when the tariffs were announced, I expected it. And the thing that we do have to understand about tariffs, and anybody, if you want to go on follow me on Instagram or just go to my page, it's fawn.weaver. The last video I did is a 14-minute recap for folks of the history of tariffs. What people don't understand, this is the sixth time that we have initiated a trade war, but we've got to understand something, because everybody looks at the 2018 trade war and says that we did it. Not actually true. So in 1997, the spirits industry signed a 0-for-0 agreement with 51 countries. 27 of those are in the EU. What that means is that there's no tariffs on either side. So from 1997 until 2018, our collective industries grew by 450%. $7.8 billion was the benefit between our countries in this trade. Highly successful. When Trump placed a tariff on steel, and I'll circle back to that in a second, because we do have a national security problem. When he placed the tariff on steel, the EU kicked off the trade war by then putting 50% tariff on bourbon. They ended the 0-for-0 agreement when steel actually needed to have tariffs. Let me explain why. If we go back not that long ago, we made 70% of the world's steel. Do you know what we make now? Anybody who watched my Instagram post, do not answer this question. Do you know what we make now? Who said 40%? We make 4%. Do you want to know what China and Russia makes? 57%. So here becomes the question. If they attack us, who are we going to get steel and metal for our armored vehicles, for our rockets, for our artillery? Where are we getting that from? Our number one partner for steel, who we import from, number one, Canada. You want to know how much Canada makes? 0.64% of the world's steel. So our number one steel trade partner doesn't even have 1%. That makes us vulnerable. And so we have to figure out the steel issue. Here's the problem, though. In all 6 tariff wars and trade wars, tariffs have never worked. Not a single time. If you go back to any of our trade wars, it either deepened the Great Depression. When anybody who drives a truck, and you're like, why are trucks so expensive? The chicken wars of 1964. Not kidding you. Europe placed a tariff on our chickens, and we responded by placing a tariff on imported trucks. All these years later, we're still paying higher prices because of that tariff war. And so what we have to figure out is kind of separate. This is not a Democrat-Republican issue. The steel issue is national security. We have to figure out how to bring production back to America so that if Russia and China, now mind you, I've visited 41 bases in the last 18 months doing leadership trainings for our troops and for our leaders. And so I come from a position of being highly concerned about our national security. But let me be clear, I voted for Kamala. I'm not defending Trump because I voted for him. I'm defending the fact that our country is a superpower and we are vulnerable if we don't fix the steel issue. So when we place a tariff on steel, they really are trying to get to a place of trying to fix the steel issue. The problem is tariffs don't work. What does work are 0 for 0 agreements. Every single time we've done it, we have made trillions of dollars. The reason why we are the dominant tech supplier in the world in terms of not even before AI, most of the tech innovations come from this country. Why? Because we have a 0 for 0 agreement on microchips, on computers, on anything that we need in order to allow our genius to flow. That thing went into place. That has brought us trillions of dollars. The WTO pharmaceutical tariff, that 0 for 0 agreement, not tariff, 0 for 0 agreement, the reason why our medicine is not through the roof and we can have a prescription and it not be crazy is because that medicine is flowing tariff-free. I could go through all of the list of 0 for 0 agreements that works. So tariffs have never worked. We should not use tariffs. We should have 0 for 0 agreements. However, there's nuance to this. We got to figure out the steel problem because we're vulnerable. There's not a single person in here that was alive when America wasn't a superpower. I don't intend on that changing under my watch. So as long as we want to camp out on the right or on the left, instead of admitting this actually is an issue that we need to fix, and understanding that tariffs don't work and 0 for 0 agreements do.
Sounds like somebody needs to write a book on tariffs. Ladies and gentlemen, the fabulous
Thank you.
founder, CEO of Uncle Nearest and Beyond, Fawn Weaver.